John stepped carefully over the rough rock. He moved slowly so he would not startle any creature that might hide in shadows. The wind blew cold across the empty plain. Dust swirled around his feet. John held his ration pack close. He felt the small weight of food inside. It would be his only meal for the next day. He spotted a shape ahead. It crouched by a jagged stone. John paused. His heart beat fast. He saw a small body wrapped in torn cloth. The creature's skin was pale green. Its eyes were wide and dark. Thin limbs trembled. John crouched down at a distance. He spoke softly. "I am John. I come in peace." His voice felt strange in the silent world. The creature did not move. It remained still, as if frozen. John reached slowly into his pack. He took out one food bar. It was small and hard, but it would fill his stomach. He broke a piece and held it out. "Here," he said. "Eat this." The alien child watched. Its eyes flicked back and forth between the food and John. It looked weak. Its breaths came in short gasps. John felt a pang of worry. He had planned to eat every bite himself. Yet he could not leave the child to starve. He tore off another piece of the food bar and placed it on the ground between them. He stepped back, giving space. The wind carried a faint scent of the bar's sweet coating. John hoped it would tempt the child. The child hesitated. It stared at the food. Hunger battled fear in its eyes. Its pale lips trembled. John held his breath. He wanted to trust the alien, but he also knew the child might flee or lash out. Slowly, the child reached out a thin finger. It touched the food. The hand shook. Then the child bent forward, took the piece, and put it to its lips. Its cheeks hollowed as it chewed slowly. John watched, relief washing over him. The child's eyes met John's. They widened in surprise. The little one's body relaxed slightly. A soft sound, almost like a whisper, escaped its throat. John smiled gently. John sat down on a rock. He opened his pack again. He had 2 small bars left. He broke each into pieces. He handed them to the child one by one. The child ate each piece more eagerly. The hunger seemed to drain some fear from its face. They sat together, side by side. The sun sank low on the horizon. A red glow spread across the sky. John felt a strange bond form. He did not know this child's name or home. But he knew he could not leave it alone. As the last piece of food disappeared, the child's small stomach seemed to fill. It leaned back, tired. John offered his hand. The child looked at it. Its fingers curled around John's. They held hands like 2 old friends. Night fell. The stars blinked overhead. John set up a small camp. He shared what little water he had. The child drank slowly. Its forehead looked less sunken. John felt hope. In the quiet night, John whispered, "You are safe with me now." The child closed its eyes. John gazed at the stars and thought of home. He did not know what tomorrow would bring. But he promised himself he would protect this child. Their journey had begun with one shared meal. And from that simple act, a friendship bloomed in the dark world. John woke early with the first light. He looked at Lyra. She slept under his small blanket. Her breathing was soft and even. John felt a fresh hope in his chest. He packed his bag quietly so he would not wake her. Then he sat on a nearby rock and watched the red sun rise above the dusty horizon. After a while, Lyra stirred. She opened her pale green eyes slowly. She blinked against the light. When she saw John, she gave a small nod. John smiled and offered her a bit of water. She drank gratefully. John then pulled out a thin fruit bar from his pack. He broke it into pieces and gave one to Lyra. She ate it with careful bites. Lyra stood and shook out her cloth. John moved to help her. He touched Lyra's shoulder gently. She jumped, but then relaxed when she saw his calm face. John spoke in a soft voice. "We must keep moving. Your colony is far, but we can make it if we follow." "The paths I know?" Lyra looked at John with curiosity. She touched the map on John's belt. He unrolled a rough parchment. He pointed to a drawn line. "We go this way," he said, but Lyra shook her head. She pointed to a narrow canyon on the map. John frowned and studied her finger. "You know a faster route?" John asked. Lyra traced another line. She pressed a point. John nodded. He rolled the map carefully and put it away. He trusted Lyra. She led him toward the canyon. The wind blew dust around their feet. John walked close so he could hear Lyra's small steps. The canyon walls rose high on each side. Shadows stretched across the rocky ground. John lit a small lantern. Its soft glow revealed ledges and crevices. Lyra moved ahead, her eyes sharp. She stepped lightly on the stones. John followed, careful not to slip. After an hour, they reached a narrow bridge made of metal beams. It looked old and unstable. Below, a deep ravine showed sharp rocks. Lyra held John's hand. She crossed first. The metal creaked under her weight. John clenched his jaw and followed. Each step made the bridge sway. Lyra stayed close to the wall, her fingers brushing the cold rock. Halfway across, the bridge shook more fiercely. A piece of metal snapped with a loud crack. John felt his heart pound. He reached for Lyra's hand and pulled her to the wall. They pressed against the stone. Dust fell from above. John tried to calm his breath. Lyra's small hand pressed against his. John said softly, "We will be safe soon." "Hold on." He moved carefully to a stronger beam. He tested it with his foot. It held firm. John then guided Lyra across that beam. Step by step, they made it to the other side. When they reached solid ground, Lyra turned and hugged John's leg. John rubbed her head gently and laughed. They sat for a moment to rest. John checked his supplies. He had little water left. His food was gone. Lyra gave him a small pouch from her belt. Inside were dried fruits from her colony. John smiled with relief. He ate one and passed the pouch to Lyra. She took a few and offered one to John. They shared the food slowly. After they finished, Lyra pointed ahead. John saw a patch of green in the distance. It looked like an oasis. John rose to his feet. He lifted Lyra onto his shoulders so she could guide him better. She held the edge of his helmet and pointed the way. They walked toward the green spot. Warm air met them. Soon they reached a small pool of clear water. Tall plants grew around it. John knelt and drank. The water was cool and sweet. He scooped some into his hands and gave it to Lyra. She drank eagerly, splashing water on her cheeks. John looked at Lyra. She smiled for the first time. Her eyes shone like stars. John felt a deep kindness for her. He thought of his home and wondered what the hours ahead would bring. Suddenly, the ground shook. John grabbed Lyra and hit the ground. Rocks rattled around them. Trees bent and leaves fell. A loud roar echoed across the oasis. John pulled Lyra behind a cluster of thick plants. He peered through the leaves. A massive creature appeared at the edge of the pool. It had 4 legs and long horns. Its eyes glowed red with hunger. The beast sniffed the air and growled. Lyra pressed herself against John's back. Trembling, John whispered, "Stay quiet, Lyra. We must hide." He drew a small blade from his belt. He made himself as small as he could. The creature's heavy footsteps crackled on the ground. It bent down to drink. John held his breath. When the beast finished, it raised its head and spotted the footprints. It roared and started moving toward them. John grabbed Lyra and ran. They dashed between the plants. Rocks flew as the creature followed. John led them through a narrow gap. The beast's horns scraped stone as it charged. John and Lyra jumped across a small trench. They fell hard but got up and ran again. Behind them, the beast's roars grew. Fainter, they reached a cave mouth hidden by vines. John pushed aside the plants and pulled Lyra inside. They crouched in darkness. John held the lantern close. Lyra put her hand to his chest and felt his strong heart. John said, "It is safe here for now." Lyra nodded, but her eyes were wide. She wrapped her arms around John's waist. John felt her trust. He lit a small fire with flint and dried leaves. He warmed his hands and gave some heat to Lyra. They sat close together. John offered the lantern's light so Lyra could see. He said, "Tomorrow we will leave this place." Lyra nodded again. She looked at John with gratitude. John felt proud and kind. Night settled outside the cave. The wind howled softly. Inside, John watched Lyra sleep. He thought about the journey ahead. He had shared his last meal once. Now he would share more. He would protect her, no matter the cost. In the quiet dark, John whispered to himself, "I will not let harm touch you, Lyra." I promise." And with this promise, John fell asleep, ready for whatever tomorrow would bring. John and Lyra left the cave at dawn. The morning sun painted the rocks gold. The two walked side by side. John carried a small bag. It held water and what food they could find. Lyra walked close, her eyes wide and curious. They reached a narrow valley. The walls rose steep and high. The ground was hard and dry. No plants grew here. John held Lyra's hand. He spoke softly. "Stay close, Lyra. This place can be dangerous." She nodded and did not speak. Suddenly, a screech echoed. John froze. He held Lyra's hand tight. Rocks above them shook. From the crevice jumped a creature. It looked like a large bird with razor-sharp claws. Its wings were torn and jagged. The creature landed and hissed. Its eyes were bright red. It circled them slowly. John moved in front of Lyra. He raised a metal rod he used for climbing. He tapped it on the ground. The creature hissed again. Lyra pressed herself against John's leg. She trembled. John whispered, "Do not be afraid." "I am here." He backed slowly. The creature flapped its wings and charged. John struck the rod on the rock. A spark flew. The creature stopped and flinched. It screeched louder. John saw a small ledge above. He pointed, "Climb up, Lyra, hurry." Lyra looked up. She jumped and grabbed a handhold. John lifted her higher. She climbed faster than before. When Lyra reached safety, John faced the creature. It charged again. John braced himself. He raised the rod above his head. The creature came close, its talons outstretched. John swung the rod. It hit the ground with a loud thump. The creature shrieked and recoiled. The creature flapped its wings and tried to fly away. But one wing was broken. It limped off into the rocks. John climbed the ledge to meet Lyra. She looked at him with wonder. John smiled. "You were brave." Lyra nodded but stayed quiet. She then pointed ahead. John saw another sound moving between the rocks. A pack of small creatures appeared. They had 4 legs and long tails. Their bodies were covered in spikes. They moved in unison, their eyes fixed on John and Lyra. John looked at Lyra. "Stay behind me." John stepped forward. He tapped the rod on a rock. The creatures paused. They hissed. One lunged at John. He swung the rod and hit its head. It collapsed. The others hesitated. John shouted, "Go away." The creatures hissed and scattered. They ran back into the valley. John held the rod tight. He looked at Lyra. She had covered her mouth with her hands, eyes wide. They moved on. Lyra leaned on John's shoulder. John offered water. She drank. Slowly, then she pointed to the ground. Small footprints led into a fissure. John knelt to look. "The prints were small and delicate," Lyra said softly. "These are my people." John's heart warmed. He said, "Lead the way." Lyra nodded and walked down the fissure. The fissure opened into a hidden path. It wound between the rocks. The walls here were smooth. Faint markings covered them. Lyra reached out and traced a symbol. John watched but did not touch. They walked. Deeper the path curved and turned. Lyra pointed to a distant glow. John saw light ahead. He smiled. "Your colony is near." Lyra's face lit with hope. Just then, a loud roar echoed. The ground shook. Rocks fell from the ceiling. John ducked and covered Lyra. Dust filled the air. The glow flickered and dimmed. When the dust settled, John saw a massive alien guard. He wore heavy armor. His skin was dark blue and tough. He held a long staff. His eyes glowed yellow. The guard's voice boomed. "Who dares enter our path?" John stood and raised his hands. Lyra came forward. She held John's hand. Lyra said, "It is me, Zara Lyra. I return with friend." The guard studied her. He lowered his staff slightly. The guard asked, "Why did you leave, child?" Lyra answered, "I was hungry. I met John. He gave me food. He kept me safe." John nodded and bowed. The guard looked at John. He spoke in a low voice. "You risk your life for her? Why?" John said, "She is alone and hungry. I could not leave her." The guard's eyes softened. He tapped his staff on the ground, then lowered it. He said, "Follow me." John and Lyra followed the guard through the Path, they arrived at a wide cavern lit by glowing crystals. More guards stood around. In the center, a circle of homes made of stone and metal rose. Small lights shone in windows. Lyra ran to her home. A woman rushed out. She was tall and strong. Her skin was pale green like Lyra's. She hugged Lyra. Tightly, Lyra said, "Mother, I am safe." The woman cried softly. The guards stepped back. The woman looked at John. She studied him. Then she nodded and said, "Thank you for saving my child." John offered a small bow. The woman turned to Lyra. She said, "We will share our food. You are home now." Lyra smiled and held John's hand. John felt his heart swell. He had faced danger and fear. He had protected Lyra. Now he stood in the hidden colony. He looked at the glowing homes and felt relief. Lyra's mother led John to a table carved from stone. Dried fruits, nuts, and warm soup waited. John sat and accepted a bowl. He ate slowly, savoring the taste. Lyra sat beside him. She offered him soup. Her eyes shone with gratitude. John smiled and said, "This is the best meal I ever had." In that moment, John knew he found more than safety. He found a friend, a bond that would last beyond this journey. The morning light warmed the hidden colony. John woke to soft voices. He looked around the small rock home. Lyra sat nearby, her green eyes bright with energy. She offered John a piece of fruit. It was sweet and soft. John tasted it and smiled. After breakfast, John packed his few belongings. He left his empty rations behind. Lyra stood by his side. She whispered, "I will guide you." John nodded. He touched Lyra's shoulder gently. They left the colony gate. Two guardians watched the entrance. They bowed to John and Lyra. John returned the gesture. He felt respect and gratitude for the guards. Outside, the landscape looked different. The hidden paths wound through narrow passes. Lyra led John along a faint trail. The rock walls here were smooth and marked with symbols. Lyra traced each symbol with her finger. John watched carefully but did not comment. They walked for hours. John felt his legs grow tired. Lyra carried a small water skin. She shared sips with John. The water was cool. John leaned against a rock to rest. He looked at Lyra. She smiled and pointed ahead. Ahead lay a field of glowing moss. It covered the ground in soft light. The moss glowed pale blue in the dim light. John bent down and touched it. It was warm and soft. He whispered, "Your planet is beautiful." Lyra's smile grew. They moved through the moss field. Tiny creatures scurried under the light. They looked like small mice with bioluminescent tails. The creatures paused when they saw John and Lyra. They then darted into tunnels beneath the rock. John followed Lyra into a narrow tunnel. The walls glowed faintly. Lyra's face lit with wonder. John felt as if they were inside a living cave. The air was cool and damp. John held his lantern high. The tunnel opened into a chamber. Water dripped from the ceiling. Tiny crystals hung like icicles. They reflected the lantern's light. John and Lyra stood in awe. Lyra said softly, "This is the heart of our home. Few humans have seen it." John felt honored. He whispered, "Thank you for sharing." They walked to the chamber's center. Lyra touched a crystal. It pulsed with light. John felt a gentle hum in the air. Lyra explained, "These crystals store our history. They show memories." John placed his hand on a crystal. His mind filled with images. Lyra's birth, her first steps, her laughter with her mother. John looked at Lyra. Tears filled her eyes. She said, "You saved my life. I want you to know our world." John felt his throat tighten. He put his arm around Lyra. They left the chamber. Lyra guided John back through the tunnel. When they reached daylight, John took a deep breath. He felt closer to Lyra and her people than ever. Their path now led upward. A steep hill rose ahead. Lyra climbed swiftly, her small feet sure on the rocks. John followed more slowly. He reached the top and saw a wide valley below. A river wound through it, cutting green fields into the rocky land. Lyra pointed, "This way." They descended toward the river. The air smelled fresh. John dipped his hand into the cool water and splashed his face. Lyra laughed, a soft, musical sound. They followed the riverbank. Birds flew overhead, their calls echoing. John felt hope. He thought of his home. He wondered if he would ever leave this planet. Suddenly, they heard shouts. John held Lyra close. Down the path ran 2 guards from Lyra's colony. Their armor shone in the sunlight. One guard shouted, "Danger ahead! A war party approaches!" John's heart pounded. He stood tall and stepped forward. The guards reached them and saluted. The lead guard said, "We did not know where you went. The enemy hunts the river valley." John clenched his fist. Lyra said, "We must warn the colony." John nodded. He said, "Show me the way." The guard pointed upstream. John, Lyra, and the guards ran along the river. The grass swayed under their feet. John heard the distant sounds of engines. Dark ships glided low above the valley. They dropped strange machines that landed with heavy thuds. Soldiers poured out. "Weapons ready?" John looked at Lyra. Her face was pale. He put his hand on her back. "Stay behind me," he said softly. They ran faster. The soldiers saw them and opened fire. Metal darts flew toward John. He grabbed Lyra and pulled her behind a boulder. Lyra pressed close to his chest. John took out a small device. He pressed a button. A bright light flashed. Then a shield formed around him and Lyra. The darts bounced off. Lyra's eyes widened with amazement. John whispered, "Light shield. It protects us." Lyra nodded. She peered over John's shoulder. The shield flickered as the darts hit. The guards called out, "Retreat to the hidden pass." John said, "Follow us." He deactivated the shield and sprinted along the riverbank. Lyra ran beside him. The guards flanked them. They reached a rocky overhang. John shouted, "Go!" The guards and Lyra climbed the rocks. John covered their backs, firing at the soldiers. The guards made it up. Lyra reached the top and grabbed the ledge. John pulled her up. John climbed after her. He looked back and saw the war party moving into the river valley. Smoke rose from the machines they left behind. Lyra asked, "Will they reach our colony?" John shook his head. He said, "No, the hidden pass leads only to the canyon. They will not find it easily." Lyra hugged John. He held her tight. They watched the valley below. John said, "We must return quickly." The guards agreed. They guided John and Lyra along a secret trail into the mountains. The climb was steep. John felt each step strain his body. Lyra climbed with ease. She reached back and helped John when he slipped. John smiled and thanked her. They reached a narrow ridge. The wind howled. Clouds swirled below. Lyra pointed to the far side. John saw the hidden colony pulsing with light in the distance. John and Lyra left the ridge and climbed down a steep slope. They arrived at the colony gate. The guards stood ready. Lyra ran forward. John followed at the gate. A crowd gathered. Lyra's mother and the other elders waited. When they saw Lyra and John, they cheered. Lyra ran to her mother. She cried, "They are coming! The enemy will attack!" The mother turned to the elders. They sounded alarms. John stood at the gate. He felt proud. He had shared his last meal with Lyra. Now he returned to save her people. As alarms echoed, John looked at Lyra. She smiled and held his hand. John knew his journey was far from over. But together they would stand against any danger, and so Part 4 ended with John and Lyra ready to defend the hidden colony and cement their bond through courage and trust. The sky above the hidden colony burned with alarms. Bright lights flashed along the stone walls. The enemy ships circled low, their engines growling. The guardians readied their weapons. John stood beside Lyra's mother, Mara. He watched the horizon. Fear and determination filled his chest. Mara leaned close to John and whispered, "Thank you for bringing Lyra back. Now you must help us defend our home." John nodded. He raised his voice so guardians could hear. "I will stand with you. I will protect Lyra and her people." Lyra squeezed John's hand. She wore a small suit of light armor provided by the guardians. Her eyes shone with pride. John adjusted his own gear. The guardians formed ranks along the wall. Spears and energy rifles glowed at their sides. A loud boom echoed as the first bomb struck the outer wall. Rock dust and debris flew. Guardians fell back. John braced himself against the trembling ground. Lyra grabbed his arm. He held her close and pointed to the gap in the wall. The enemy soldiers poured through the breach, dark armor and glowing. Weapons advanced, guardians met them. Metal clashed as spears struck. Energy beams sizzled through the air. The sounds of battle filled the sky. John drew a simple blaster from his belt. He aimed at a soldier advancing on a young guardian. He fired. The beam hit the ground near the soldier's feet. The blast threw him back. The guardian raised his weapon and fired again. Lyra moved beside John. She knelt and helped a wounded guardian stand. She wrapped his arm with a cloth. The guardian bowed to her. John watched her. He felt her strength. A soldier raised a heavy weapon and fired at the wall. The blast carved a hole. John saw a group of soldiers rushing through. He raised his blaster. Lyra grabbed his arm. "Take the path behind the wall," she whispered. She pointed to a narrow tunnel. John understood. He grabbed a smoke grenade from his pack. He pulled the pin and tossed it into the breach. A thick cloud of smoke poured out. Soldiers stopped and coughed. Guardians took the moment to push them back. John and Lyra darted into the tunnel. It was dark and narrow. They moved quickly, following the path they used earlier. The tunnel opened into a side chamber. Lyra pointed to a hidden door in the far wall. John pressed a panel. The door slid open. Inside lay a store of ancient weapons. Swords, spears, and old rifles covered a table. Lyra's mother must have brought them here for emergencies. John said, "Take what you need." Lyra picked up a small energy pistol. John grabbed a longer rifle. They turned to leave. The door slid closed behind them. Light from outside flickered through cracks. They reached another tunnel that led to a tower overlooking the battle. John climbed the spiral stairs. Lyra followed. At the top, they saw the full battlefield. Guardians fought bravely below. Enemy ships hovered above, dropping soldiers. The sky glowed red with explosions. John set up the rifle on the tower's ledge. He aimed at an enemy gunner on a platform. The gunner's heavy weapon fired at the wall. John waited for the right moment. When the gunner paused, John squeezed the trigger. The beam flew true. The gunner fell from the platform. Lyra watched in awe. She hugged John's arm. He smiled and took her hand. She pointed to a ship preparing to drop more soldiers. John said, "Cover me." He moved to another spot. Lyra held her pistol at the ready. She fired small beams that hit the ship's cargo ramp. Sparks flew, slowing the ramp's descent. The ship withdrew, engines humming. Without reinforcements, the enemy soldiers began to retreat. Guardians cheered and surged forward. John and Lyra climbed down from the tower. On the ground, Mara met them. She smiled with relief. "You saved us," she said. John shook his head. "We saved each other." Mara placed a hand on John's shoulder. Lyra ran to the breach in the wall. Guardians repaired the damage with energy tools. Lyra helped guide them. John joined in, passing tools and urging them on. When the hole was sealed, the Guardians formed. A circle around John and Lyra. The colony's elders stepped forward. They held glowing crystals. Each crystal pulsed in their hands. The eldest elder spoke. "For your courage and kindness, we offer you our bond. These crystals bind you to our people." He placed a crystal around John's neck. It glowed softly. John felt warmth spread through him. Another elder placed a crystal on Lyra's chest. She smiled. The crystals connected with a faint sound like a soft bell. Mara said, "You are family now." Lyra hugged John and kissed his cheek. John smiled and hugged her back. The Guardians raised their weapons in salute. The crowd cheered. Lights flashed. And music began. The colony's musicians played simple melodies on metal flutes. John and Lyra walked to the center of the courtyard. They sat at a long table laden with food. Fresh fruits, warm bread, and rich soup awaited. John tasted the soup. It was savory and delicious. He closed his eyes and savored it. Lyra smiled at John. She said, "This meal is for you." John looked. Around, the colony celebrated their victory. Lyra leaned close. She said softly, "Thank you, John." He took her hand and said, "Thank you for trusting me." The night filled with laughter and music. John and Lyra sat together, sharing the meal. They looked at the stars above the colony. The hidden world felt safe. John knew the journey was over. He had shared his last meal once, now he shared many. He had earned a new home and a friend for life. Part 5 ends with John and Lyra intertwined in trust, celebration, and hope for the future. John woke before dawn. He could hear soft singing from the colony. The song was gentle and calm. He sat up and stretched. His body felt sore, but his heart was light. He looked at Lyra. She slept in a small bed next to his, her hand resting on. John smiled and covered them both with a warm blanket. He rose quietly and stepped outside. The sky was pale blue. Cool air brushed his face. He saw guardians pacing the walls, watching the horizon. All was peaceful for now. John walked to the edge of the courtyard. He watched the sunrise, its light touching the jagged rocks around them. A soft voice spoke behind him. "Good morning, John." It was Mara, Lyra's mother. She held 2 cups of warm tea. John turned and smiled. He took a cup, feeling the warmth spread. Mara said, "Your actions saved us all. For that, we are grateful." John bowed his head. "I only did what was right," he said softly. Mara nodded and offered the second cup to John. John took a sip. The tea was fragrant and sweet. He felt its warmth chase away his aches. Mara placed a hand on his shoulder. "You are family now," she said quietly. John looked at Mara. "Thank you." He meant it with all his heart. Mara smiled and walked back to her home. John turned and gazed at the colony awakening around him. Lyra joined him. She wore a simple dress woven from blue fibers. Her hair was tied back. She carried a small basket of fresh fruits. She offered John one. He accepted it and took a bite. The fruit was juicy and bright. Lyra said, "I am glad you stayed." John smiled and said, "I could not leave you here alone." Lyra nodded and looked around. The colony bustled with activity. Guardians trained, children played, and elders studied ancient texts. John asked, "What will you do now?" Lyra looked thoughtful. "I will help rebuild what was broken, and I will learn about your world as you learn about ours." She lifted her hand. John placed his in hers. They walked together into the heart of the colony. Walls stood tall and strong. Crystals glowed softly, lighting the paths. Guardians saluted John as he passed. Lyra smiled at each one. They reached a large tent. Inside, elders gathered around a round table. Maps lay spread out. Lyra's mother stood at the head. She welcomed John and Lyra. Mara said, "We plan to trade with other worlds now. John's people may help us connect. In return, we will share our knowledge and resources." The elders nodded in agreement. John looked at the maps. They showed star routes and distant planets. John's eyes lit up. He pointed to one route. "I know that path. It leads to a human station." Lyra's mother looked surprised. John continued, "I was part of a crew exploring that sector. I can guide your ships there." The elders whispered among themselves. One elder stepped forward. "We will build a small fleet. You will lead the first mission, John." John felt a mix of pride and fear. He glanced at Lyra. She squeezed his hand. John said, "I will do my best." The elder smiled and stepped back. Lyra beamed at John. Outside, the sun rose higher. John and Lyra walked to a work area. Craftsmen carved wood and metal. They built small ships and tools. Lyra showed John how they wove metal threads into circuits. John taught Lyra how to use a human tool to cut metal plates. They worked side by side. John's rough hands guided Lyra's delicate fingers. Lyra laughed when she cut her thumb. John wrapped her finger with a cloth and kissed it gently. Lyra said, "I have never felt so safe with someone." John smiled. "I will always protect you." Lyra leaned on his shoulder as they worked. By midday, the first ship's hull lay complete. It was small but strong. Crystals lined its edges. Lyra's people loaded supplies. John oversaw the placement of human food rations and water containers. That evening, the ship stood ready. Its hull gleamed under the crystal lights. Guardians and elders gathered around. Lyra's mother placed a hand on John's chest. She whispered, "Good luck, son." John felt tears in his eyes. John said, "Thank you, Mother." He stepped into the Ship's cabin. Lyra followed him. She touched a switch. A soft hum filled the cabin. The crystal engines glowed. Lyra said, "I will come with you." John shook his head. "Your people need you here. I must go now, but I will return." Lyra's eyes filled with tears. She nodded and held John close. John promised, "I will come back for you." "I swear it," Lyra whispered. "I trust you." John kissed her forehead. Outside, Guardians loaded cargo. The ship's ramp closed. John stood at the window. Lyra waved. John raised his hand and waved back. The engines roared. The ship lifted. John held a small crystal given by Lyra's mother. It glowed softly in his hand. He whispered, "Until we meet again." The ship flew into the sky, leaving the hidden world below. Lyra watched until the ship was a small dot. She turned and walked back to the colony. Guardians fell into line beside her. In space, John guided the ship toward the human station. He looked at the stars. His heart was full of hope. He remembered the day he shared his last meal. From that moment, his life changed. He found a friend, a family, and a purpose beyond his world. As the hidden colony receded behind him, John carved a new path for two worlds to meet. And one day he would return to the planet that taught him the best meal is the one shared with someone in need.